By 1943, Japan's admirals were horrified to see the United States launch hundreds of warships and aircraft carriers at a pace never seen in history. The U.S. Navy's two-ocean program, backed by massive shipyards like Kaiser and Newport News, turned America's industrial capacity into a weapon. The year the sea changed, America's industrial awakening. January 12, 1943, Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, Japan. Snow drifts across the docks as Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stands motionless, hands clasped behind his back. The wind bites, but he doesn't notice. Before him, a new destroyer is being readied for launch, its gray hull glinting in the pale light. Around him, officers murmur of victories past, of Pearl Harbor, of the invincible Imperial Navy. Yet Yamamoto's gaze is fixed on a telegram from Tokyo. Across the Pacific, in the shipyards of America, something unbelievable is happening. In just 12 months, the United States has built what Japan believed would take decades, an entire naval armada. Aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, ships of every class rolling off assembly lines like automobiles. The very idea seems absurd, but the numbers are real. The message on Yamamoto's desk lists ship counts. USS Essex, commissioned. USS Yorktown, launched. USS Intrepid, trials complete. The list goes on. More than 100 new hulls since the previous spring, and in the bays of Oregon and Virginia, still more rise. Metal skeletons under floodlights. Thousands of men and women welding, riveting, assembling at a tempo no empire in history has matched. Impossible, whispers Vice Admiral Ugaki. Yamamoto folds the paper. Not impossible, he replies quietly. American, the two-ocean dream. 2 years earlier, in Washington, D.C., before the smoke of Pearl Harbor had cleared, Congress passed the Two-Ocean Navy Act of 1940, a plan so vast it seemed delusional at the time. The goal? To build a navy large enough to fight and win in both the Atlantic and Pacific simultaneously. Admiral Ernest J. King, the iron-willed chief of naval operations, had demanded nothing less. He called it insurance against tyranny. Now, with the nation at war, his insurance was maturing. America's shipyards were multiplying. In Richmond, California, industrialist Henry J. Kaiser, a man who'd never built a ship before, turned acres of mudflat into the most productive shipyard in history. His motto, find a faster way. In Newport News, Virginia, shipwrights who once took years to craft a single hull now built carriers in months. Every day's delay, Kaiser said, is another boy who doesn't come home. The arsenal of democracy ignites. By 1943, this philosophy had become a rhythm. Steel arriving by rail, welders in shifts around the clock, prefabricated sections dropped into place by cranes the size of cathedrals. Women in coveralls, rosies, as they were called, learned to weld decks and assemble turbines. Teenagers drove forklifts. Retired engineers came back to work. Factories that had once made cars and refrigerators now turned out propellers, radar towers, and naval guns. In the Pacific, Japanese intelligence officers scrambled to track this miracle. Their reports to Tokyo were grim. Between January and December 1943, the U.S. launched 65 destroyers, 28 submarines, 8 fleet carriers, and more than 150 escort carriers and auxiliary ships. And behind those hulls lay thousands of Liberty ships and tankers feeding them, an unending tide of logistics. For every Japanese ship sunk, America launched 3 to replace it. The Imperial Navy, once the pride of Asia, was now outnumbered, outbuilt, and soon outmaneuvered. They build them like sandwiches. At Truk Lagoon, Japan's Gibraltar of the Pacific, the news spread like a ghost story among the sailors. "They build ships like sandwiches," one seaman said, shaking his head. "We can't sink them fast enough." It wasn't an exaggeration. Kaiser's shipyards broke records daily. A Liberty ship, Robert E. Peary, was famously built in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. A publicity stunt, yes, but proof of concept. The shipyards became legends of their own. In Portland, the air rang with the clang of steel, 24 hours a day. In San Francisco, lights from the Mare Island Navy Yard lit the bay like daylight. Across the Columbia River, in Vancouver, new carriers slid down their ramps into the water under the cheers of thousands of workers who'd never seen the ocean before this war began. America had transformed itself into a machine of war, one that didn't rest, didn't flinch, and didn't stop. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, the Imperial Navy's High Command gathered inside the underground chambers of the Naval Ministry. Maps sprawled across the table, pins marking Midway, Guadalcanal, the Solomons, each now symbols of Japan's overstretched empire. Rear Admiral Tomiji Koyanagi traced his finger over the Pacific. "They build carriers faster than we can train pilots," he muttered. "And their carriers are larger," added another. "More armor, more planes, more fuel." A silence settled. The admirals knew the truth. Japan's industrial base simply couldn't compete. Its factories were scattered across islands, vulnerable to bombing. Its resources, oil, steel, rubber, came from far-flung conquests already under siege. Every new ship came at the cost of something else. Fewer tanks, fewer aircraft, fewer guns. In contrast, the United States had turned its vast continental wealth into an ocean of steel. When Yamamoto spoke again, his words were cold, deliberate. "We awoke a giant, and now it is building." The birth of a new fleet. In May 1943, at the Newport News shipbuilding yard, the USS Essex, CV-9, slid into the James River. She was the first of her class, 872 feet of flight deck, 100 aircraft capacity, a floating city of steel and aviation. By year's end, 5 more of her sisters would join her. Yorktown, Lexington, Bunker Hill, Intrepid, Wasp, each represented a leap forward in design. More armor, more planes, faster refueling, and radar-guided defenses. The Japanese fleet, built for the lightning wars of 1941, suddenly looked obsolete. At Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester Nimitz watched his new navy gather. From the bridge of the Enterprise, he surveyed the harbor. Rows of fresh hulls, sleek and bristling. Ships named for heroes and battles yet to come. He knew what this meant. "That now," he said to his staff, "we take the offensive." The Pacific turns. The year 1943 would mark a transformation, not just in numbers, but in momentum. The Americans no longer fought for survival. They were now the hunters. Carriers like Yorktown and Essex began launching strikes deep into Japanese-held territory. Destroyers escorted convoys across the Pacific with radar precision. Submarines, built in record numbers, prowled shipping lanes, strangling Japan's supply routes. Each new vessel was part of a greater symphony, an industrial orchestra conducted by Washington, performed by millions across the nation. And for the men at sea, this power felt tangible. In letters home, sailors wrote of entire task forces appearing overnight, of new ships joining their formations weekly. "We can't even learn their names before the next one arrives," one sailor joked. The Japanese, once masters of naval warfare, watched helplessly as the tide turned. For every carrier they lost at Midway or Santa Cruz, the Americans produced another, larger, faster, deadlier. By the dawn of 1944, The Pacific was no longer Japan's ocean. It belonged to the shipyards, the welders, the engineers, to the unstoppable machine that was the United States Navy. And it had all begun in just 1 year. Engines of Empire. How America forged the fleet that would win the Pacific. February 3rd, 1943. Richmond, California. The dawn fog rolls over the San Francisco Bay, blanketing the Kaiser shipyards in a ghostly gray. Beneath the hum of floodlights, sparks bloom from hundreds of welding torches, tiny suns flickering across half-finished hulls. The air smells of oil, steel, and sweat. Foreman Walter "Red" Harrison wipes grime from his brow, shouting over the din. Plate 16, get it in position. We launch before midnight. It's not a boast. It's a promise. In the year since Pearl Harbor, Henry Kaiser's vision has turned this muddy shoreline into an industrial miracle. Each day, the yards produce a new Liberty ship, a 14,000-ton cargo vessel built from prefabricated parts, like a child's model kit on a colossal scale. But these are more than freighters. They are arteries in a living organism, feeding the U.S. Navy with fuel, munitions, food, and the one thing Japan cannot match: momentum, the heartbeat of the war machine. Every rivet that clatters into place echoes far beyond California. In the Midwest, Pittsburgh's steel mills run day and night, pouring molten ore into the molds that will become hull plates. The Great Lakes factories, once the pride of the automobile industry, now churn out turbines, propellers, and engines. At the Ford plant in Willow Run, Michigan, engineers take the assembly line concept to the skies. One B-24 Liberator bomber leaves the factory every 63 minutes, a rhythm that mirrors the tempo of the shipyards. "We don't just build ships," says an engineer at the Kaiser yard. "We build time. We build the future." Meanwhile, on the East Coast, Newport News shipbuilding pushes its workforce to the limit. Electric cranes swing 30-ton bulkheads into place. Women riveters, their hair tied in scarves, stand shoulder to shoulder with veterans of World War I. Every yard in the nation hums the same industrial hymn, an anthem to efficiency, precision, and purpose. By 1943, more than 1,200 shipyards are operational across the United States. At their peak, they employ over 1 million workers, half of them women. Japan has no answer for this. A nation transformed. The speed of construction astonishes even the Navy. Ship hulls are built in sections: bow, stern, midship, each crafted separately, then welded together with millimeter precision. The old art of riveting gives way to welding, faster and stronger, an innovation Japan's craftsmen disdain as crude. But the Americans don't care for elegance. They care for output. "You can make a battleship beautiful," Kaiser once told reporters, "or you can make it fast. The ocean won't mind." At Mare Island, a Navy officer watches as an escort carrier slides into the water, completed in less than 6 months. "We've learned to make war like we make cars," he says, "and God help anyone who tries to outbuild Detroit. These ships, small, compact, but deadly, will soon form the beating heart of the Navy's hunter-killer groups. Escorting convoys, launching fighter patrols, protecting submarines, each one a fragment of America's expanding naval mosaic. The numbers that terrified Tokyo. By late 1943, Japan's naval attachés in Switzerland begin smuggling out data, attempting to understand the scale of what they face. The reports are passed up the chain to Admiral Toyoda Soimu, now Chief of the Navy General Staff. They read like science fiction. Total U.S. tonnage afloat now exceeds 8 million tons, an additional 3 million under construction. Aircraft carriers increasing monthly. Destroyers and submarines exceed imperial production by 5 to 1. Toyota does not speak. He stares at the paper for a long time, then folds it carefully. "We cannot fight numbers," he says at last. "We must fight spirit." It's a noble sentiment, but hopeless. American industry is now fighting a different kind of war. Factories in Iowa and Kansas, far from any ocean, are producing marine engines by the thousands. Every component is standardized, interchangeable, mass-produced. A destroyer in California can receive replacement parts from Ohio without modification. For Japan, whose ships are handcrafted and individually designed, this is unthinkable. For America, it is simply Tuesday. The human engine, back in Richmond, the shipyard gates open before sunrise. Thousands pour in. Farmers, students, mothers, immigrants. A symphony of humanity. They call themselves victory builders. Posters line the walls. "The ship you build today will save a life tomorrow." Among them is Rosie Martinez, a 23-year-old welder from New Mexico. She works the night shift, guiding a torch along the seams of a destroyer's hull. The heat scalds her face. Sparks bite her arms. She doesn't flinch. "My brother's in the Pacific," she says. "If I stop, he sinks." Stories like hers ripple through the yards. Quiet, unrecorded heroism. Each hammer strike, each rivet. A heartbeat in the rhythm of victory. The fleet takes shape. By December 1943, the transformation is complete. The U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet now boasts 9 fleet carriers, 23 escort carriers, 120 destroyers, and hundreds of auxiliary ships, transports, and oilers. Behind them sail supply convoys so vast they stretch across the horizon, a moving city of cranes, cargo, and cranes again. These ships are more than tools. They're symbols of industrial will, democratic unity, and sheer scale. In the Atlantic, the same factories feed Admiral King's fleets, hunting German U-boats. In the Pacific, Admiral Nimitz now commands an armada so immense that Japanese reconnaissance can no longer track it accurately. Where once they had counted ships individually, they now count by classes, from the factory floor to the front line. Aboard the USS Essex, Lieutenant Commander Robert "Bob" Johnson writes in his diary, "Every time we come back to Pearl, there's another one of us waiting. They rise out of the docks like ghosts. Fresh paint, new decks, full squadrons. We're not the same Navy we were. We're something else entirely." He's right. By the time Essex steams toward the Marshall Islands, the U.S. Navy has grown into the largest maritime force the world has ever seen. A juggernaut fed by factories, not fortunes. And deep in the Pacific, Japanese admirals, once sure of their dominance, begin to whisper what they'd never dared say aloud. The Americans have built an ocean, the silent triumph. Back in Richmond, another launch begins. Sirens wail. Workers gather at the railings as yet another Liberty ship slides down the greased slipway into the bay. The crowd cheers. Children wave flags. A brass band plays "Anchors Aweigh." A name is painted across the bow. The Spirit of 43. No one here will ever see the battles in the Solomons or the Marianas. But their work will be there. In every gallon of fuel, every gun barrel, every ship that rises from the waves. And as the tide carries the new vessel into the open sea, a welder named Rosie smiles through the smoke. "There," she says softly. "One more for my brother." The Pacific War is no longer fought only with guns and torpedoes. It's fought with hammers, cranes, and courage. And in that war, America is winning. The reckoning, when Japan realized the ocean no longer belonged to them, June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea. The horizon burns with sunlight, but beneath it, the ocean trembles with thunder. Dozens of American carriers steam in formation, their decks crowded with Hellcats, Avengers, and dauntless dive bombers. Above, the sky hums with the power of engines built in Detroit and Buffalo, carried across the Pacific by ships that didn't exist a year earlier. Admiral Raymond Spruance, calm as ever, peers through binoculars from the bridge of his flagship, the USS Indianapolis. "Contact," a radar officer calls out. "Multiple bogies, bearing 280, distance 210 miles. Spruance nods. "The Japanese are coming. Far to the west, the Imperial Navy's last great carrier force, the Mobile Fleet, advances under Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa. On paper, it's a powerful armada, 9 carriers, 5 battleships, and hundreds of aircraft. But the admirals aboard those ships already know the truth. They are sailing into a storm that no amount of courage can overcome. A storm made not of weather, but of industry. The ghost of Midway. 2 years earlier, Japan had ruled the Pacific. At Pearl Harbor, their bombers had humbled a sleeping giant. At Midway, they had nearly crushed America's carrier fleet, until luck and skill reversed the tide. But now, in 1944, the same Americans who once struggled to defend Hawaii have rebuilt the Pacific Navy twice over. The old ships, Enterprise, Saratoga, are no longer alone. Now they are joined by a new generation. The Essex, Lexington II, Bunker Hill, Yorktown II, Intrepid, Wasp, and Ticonderoga, steel giants born from the shipyards of 1943. Each carrier carries nearly 100 planes, radar-guided and hardened by combat experience. Together, they form Task Force 58, the most powerful naval strike group ever assembled. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, the proof of production. At 10:23 a.m., the first wave of Japanese aircraft appears on the radar. "Angels 15, calls the radar man. 100, 200, no. Over 300 planes. Spruance's operations officer smiles grimly. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot begins. Minutes later, Hellcats from the Essex and Lexington launch into the air. Their engines roar. Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasps, products of America's unstoppable factories. In minutes, the blue sky fills with smoke trails and falling planes. What unfolds is not a battle. It's an industrial massacre. In less than a day, the Imperial Navy loses over 300 aircraft and nearly all its trained pilots. The Americans lose fewer than 30. The Japanese Admiralty, listening to the radio reports, fall silent. The numbers are staggering and irreversible. Admiral Ozawa's chief of staff whispers, "They have replaced their entire fleet, and we cannot even replace our crews. An ocean of ships." Far behind the battle line, Admiral Chester Nimitz reviews the daily fleet report aboard the Enterprise. The paper is thick with names. Destroyers, tankers, carriers, ships launching faster than the admirals can memorize them. He turns to his aide. "Remind me, how many carriers do we have now? Counting those at Pearl and those in transit, sir." 45. Nimitz exhales slowly. 45, he repeats. God help them. It is the living embodiment of the Two-Ocean Navy Act. The dream of 1940 now made steel and fire. The United States hasn't just built a fleet. It has built an ocean within the ocean. Each task group, fueled, repaired, resupplied, operates as a self-contained ecosystem. Mobile repair ships fix hulls at sea. Floating dry docks restore vessels without returning to port. Oilers refuel the entire fleet mid-voyage. This is what Japan's admirals never conceived. Logistics as a weapon. Tokyo in shock. In the underground war rooms of Tokyo, maps of the Pacific are covered in red pins, each one marking a lost base. Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan. Reports from the front grow shorter, then stop entirely. Admiral Toyota sits in silence as a courier brings the latest dispatch. The Shokaku and Taiho, two of Japan's most advanced carriers, have been sunk in a single day. How? He asks quietly. American submarines, sir. Even the seas themselves now belong to the enemy. Toyota stands, pacing the length of the room. They build ships faster than we can count them, he mutters. Each one brings 1,000 deaths. No one answers. They all know the truth. Japan's shipyards, limited by raw materials and bombing raids, can no longer keep pace. The Imperial Navy has become a relic, magnificent, but doomed. The men who built victory. While Japan mourns its carriers, half a world away, in the shipyards of the Columbia River, the work continues. The Ticonderoga slides down its ramp into the water, greeted by cheers. In Brooklyn, the Bennington follows. At Newport News, welders put the finishing touches on the Shangri-La. Each launch ceremony is identical. Flags, bands, champagne. But beneath the celebration lies fatigue. Workers have been at it for 3 years without rest. Yet they do not stop. A newspaper headline captures it best. Every rivet a bullet. Every ship a promise. In total, between 1941 and 1945, the United States builds 2,200 warships, 2,700 Liberty and Victory cargo ships, over 297,000 aircraft. It is production on a scale unseen before or since, and it breaks the back of the Japanese Empire. The turning of the tide. As American forces push through the Marianas and toward the Philippines, the fleet becomes more than a fighting force. It is a moving city of steel, 3,000 miles from home. Sailors aboard the Intrepid watch as fresh ships arrive weekly. Some joke that the ocean's getting crowded with Yankees. When General Douglas MacArthur wades ashore at Leyte in October 1944, the sky above him swarms with American aircraft. Behind him, the horizon is filled with ships, carriers, battleships, destroyers, transports, the product of that miraculous year of construction. Japan, once master of the Pacific, now fights in the shadow of America's assembly lines, the price of industrial supremacy. But the miracle of production has its cost. Across America, exhaustion spreads like a hidden wound. Factory shifts blur day into night. Accidents rise. Workers collapse from heat, fatigue, and fumes. Yet still they come, driven by patriotism, vengeance, or the simple need to see the war ended. In a shipyard hospital in Richmond, a nurse named Lillian Cates writes in her diary, "We patch them up and send them back. They say they're just tired, but I see more than that. They've built too much, too fast. Even steel has limits. So do people." Her words will never reach the headlines, but they capture a truth buried beneath the triumph. The human cost of forging the mightiest navy in history. The empire eclipsed. By 1945, Japan's fleet exists only on paper. The Yamato, pride of the Imperial Navy, sails on her final mission in April, a desperate suicide charge toward Okinawa. She never makes it. American aircraft, launched from a dozen carriers built in that miraculous year, descend upon her in waves. In 2 hours, the greatest battleship ever constructed becomes a burning tomb. The sea boils with oil and fire. When the smoke clears, the last dream of Japan's maritime supremacy sinks beneath the waves. The message to Tokyo is clear. The ocean now belongs to America. The legacy of 1943. The shipyards that once roared with industry fall silent when the war ends. Many workers go home. Others never return, lost to fatigue, disease, or the long quiet of peace. But what they built remains eternal. The ships of the Essex class will serve for decades, through Korea, Vietnam, even the Cold War. They will carry the first jets, the first nuclear weapons, the first astronauts. From the mud of Richmond to the docks of Pearl Harbor, the legacy of 1943 endures, not just as a triumph of machinery, but of will. America did in 1 year what no nation had ever done. It built a navy capable of remaking the world, and in doing so, it changed the very meaning of power, proving that wars are not only won by those who fight them, but by those who build them.